The first reading is from Isaiah 58, 1-9. Shout out, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask me my righteousness judgments. They want God on their side. Why do we fast? But you do not see? Why humble ourselves? But you do not notice? Look, you serve your own interest on your fast day and oppress all your workers. You fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? It's not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. It is not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house. When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call the Lord with answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Came in today and greeted other people here at the church. How many of you asked each other, what do you think of the cold? Or how you doing? How's the weather? Right, as Canadians, it's a good Canadian question. We focus so much on the weather, and we like to talk about it. And for the past few weeks, or feels like a month, we've been talking about how cold it is. So we've hit our longest stretch of days below zero since 2015. 10 years since it's been this cold for this long. And it reminded me of an event when I was back in Toronto a few years ago, and we had another cold stretch, not quite this long, but colder for a short number of days. And at that point, Toronto was also, as they are now, still dealing with a refugee crisis. Lots of people coming in, and there wasn't enough space. And so you had a bunch of new refugees who had come to Canada, come to Toronto, and they were forced to sleep on the sidewalk and wait for a space to open up. And so several churches, several religious leaders got together and put together a petition to petition the government to open up space, saying this is our time, that we need to open up the space for those most vulnerable, to protect them, to keep them from freezing. And while many people signed on to this, you also had, as I've mentioned before, the people who just think the church should do everything, that we're not good enough. And so they said, well, if you want people to deal with the cold, you want the government to deal with it, why don't you open up your own doors and welcome people in and have them sleep in your own gyms and your own sanctuaries? When the weather becomes more than just a conversation piece for us, it shows us the complicated ways that our social systems interact and how they crack under pressure. As these people protest that not enough is being done by the church, we have to ask, what does this have to do with our readings today? And I tell this story about the church receiving some pushback and fighting for justice issues because this is a similar message to what Isaiah offered to Israel in our readings from today. In fact, Isaiah sounds a bit like those critics that make the comments saying that people of faith need to do more. We hear those words asking us to question our own response. When Isaiah says, "Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house." Now, Isaiah's words are spoken to the nation of Israel after they have returned from Babylonian captivity. And it is experience, this captivity and return to their land, that changed the generations and changed people forever, including how society itself functioned. The monarchy no longer stands. The king is no longer in charge, which means the institution that had existed to ensure that people were cared for, that proclaimed justice to the oppressed, these functions were no longer overseen by the king. Scholar J. Clinton McCann suggests that the entire book of Isaiah, and these verses we heard today in particular, invites the whole people of God in every generation to participate in the role formally entrusted to the kings, namely the establishment of justice and righteousness toward the goal of international peace. And importantly, as McCann reminds us, this invitation is not just for one generation at one time, but it's to ongoing participation. It's an ongoing invitation to think beyond ourselves and to think of others, to act in a way that supports the whole community, to live a life of faith and worship that looks outwards rather than inwards. Isaiah is criticizing those who perform religious rites or fasts as a way of glorifying themselves. They question why God has not come near to them when they have fasted. They declare that God has not noticed that they have humbled themselves. And this is because, as God says, on their day of fasting, they continued to exploit their workers, they found time to quarrel, and they lifted up their own voices as if they were equal to God. Isaiah teaches us that fasting or worship that only serves ourselves is missing something important. It is missing the invitation to be light for the world, to demonstrate righteousness that comes from God. Hearing again from Clinton McCann, he writes, "Proper worship accompanied by the embodiment of justice and righteousness will not earn God's favor. Rather, it will put the people in touch with God's abiding presence with them. In this act of denying themselves and thus embracing the other in God's name, the people will hear what God was, and that God was and is always saying, 'Here I am.'" And so this is the instruction that Isaiah provides to Israel. And it's a similar instruction that Jesus offers to the disciples in his Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." A town on a hill cannot be hidden. In a sermon where Jesus offers the challenge that your righteousness must exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees, or you will never enter the kingdom of heaven, Jesus also reminds us that we are made to do this work. We do not build up our worship and our abilities on our own, but we as individuals and as the whole church have been built by the divine, by Father, Son, and Holy Spirit to be justice bearers and to do good deeds. We are reminded by Jesus of who built this city, that God has prepared the church and each one of us, its members, to be salt and light. So if we recognize that we are salt and light, and we go out into the world, what might we anticipate happening as we pursue this calling to be justice bearers? The psalmist tells us that in pursuing justice, we will never be shaken. We hear that they have given freely to the poor, and their righteousness stands forever. They will hold up their head with honor. But, there's usually a but in these situations. You saw we included the last verse, which originally isn't always included in our psalm reading, because it gets a little downtrodden. Verse 10 tells us that the wicked will see it and be angry. They will gnash their teeth and pine away. But the desires of the wicked will perish. The psalm reminds us that the wicked will see the salt and light in the world and be angry. Now, most other uses of this Hebrew word in this form of anger in the Old Testament talk about when the people provoke God, when they stand in opposition to God's will and stir up God's anger by doing evil, by worshiping idols and by offering improper sacrifices. But now, as we hear in the psalm, when proper worship aligns us with God's will, as we share in the radical approach to discipleship with a goal of nothing less than sharing the perfection of God, It is not God who is now angry, but the wicked. When we humble ourselves and stand not in opposition to God, we may find ourselves in opposition to others, in opposition to those who do not strive for justice. Which may remind us of Jesus' words from last week. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. When we are salt and light in the world, there's a good chance that we will face opposition, an experience known by Jesus himself. And so as we hear the prophet's words this morning, may we reflect on our actions. Are we fasting, worshiping, and acting to glorify ourselves? Or are we doing these things to bring about God's kingdom? In our reflection, we are invited to give up our own self-interest so that God's interests may be made known to the world. And for each of us and for different churches around this city and around this country and around the world, this will be revealed in different ways. But for today, maybe you are called to recognize that it is cold, that God's loved ones are in need of shelter, and that our voices which lift up prayer can also lift up calls to action. And so at Trinity, as we serve people with hot coffee in a warm room at the People's Cafe, or as we help distribute jackets to those around the city, or as we talk to our politicians about opening new warming centers, in all of these actions, we are enacting the fast which God has asked of us. And in doing it, we are hearing God say, "Here I am." Know that you are salt and light for this time and for this work. May God lead us to bringing forth the kingdom of mercy, peace, and justice. Amen.